What if you woke up one morning, checked the level on your kitchen counter, and realized your entire $680 million apartment building was leaning toward the river? In the historic city of Richmond, Virginia, a massive new luxury skyscraper was supposed to be the crown jewel of the skyline, but it is currently turning into a nightmare that defies the laws of modern engineering. This high-tech glass spire isn't just settling into the ground, it is actively tilting at a rate of 3 inches every single year. At that speed, within a few decades, the building won't just be a bit crooked, it will be structurally non-viable. The most terrifying part is that the world's top structural engineers have been called in. They've looked at the soil, they've scanned the foundation, and they are completely stumped. They don't know why it's moving, and they definitely don't know how to stop it. Today, we are going deep into the Richmond lean to understand how a nearly $700 million project can be defeated by the very ground it stands on, and why this tilting giant might be the most expensive mistake in the history of the South. Richmond is a city built on hills and history, sitting right on the fall line of the James River. When the plans for the Ascent Tower were first proposed, it was seen as a bold leap into the future for a city known more for its brick row houses and monuments. The tower was designed to reach over 50 stories, offering panoramic views of the Virginia landscape. To support such a massive weight, the engineers designed a deep foundation system, driving hundreds of steel-reinforced concrete piles deep into the earth. On paper, it was invincible. It was designed to withstand hurricanes, floods, and the passage of time. But nature had a different plan, and it seems there was something lurking deep beneath the Richmond soil that the initial surveys missed entirely. The tilt was first noticed by the elevator technicians. Modern high-speed elevators are incredibly sensitive pieces of equipment. They run on tracks that have to be perfectly vertical to within a fraction of a millimeter. If the tracks are even slightly out of alignment, the elevator cars will start to vibrate. Or worse, the safety sensors will trigger an emergency stop. About 18 months after the building was topped out, the elevators in the North Bank started acting up. When the technicians put their laser levels on the guide rails, they didn't just find a small deviation. They found that the entire shaft had shifted. The building was bowing toward the James River, and it wasn't a one-time event. It was a slow, steady, and relentless movement. As the news leaked out, the developers tried to downplay it. They called it expected secondary settlement. Every big building sinks a little bit as it finds its final footprint in the earth. But 3 inches a year is not settlement, it is a structural migration. To put that in perspective, the Leaning Tower of Pisa took centuries to reach its famous angle. The Richmond Tower is moving significantly faster. If you stand on the top floor today and drop a marble on the floor, it won't stay still. It will slowly but surely roll toward the northwest corner of the building. For the residents who paid millions for these condos, that rolling marble is the sound of their investment disappearing in real time. Engineers have been scrambling to figure out what is happening. The first theory was that the piles weren't driven deep enough into the bedrock. In Richmond, the geology is a complex mix of granite and something called the Calvert Formation, which is essentially a prehistoric layer of marine clay. This clay is notorious among local builders for being active. It expands and contracts with moisture. But the Ascent Tower was supposed to go right through that clay and anchor into the solid granite beneath. However, new core samples suggest a terrifying possibility. The bedrock they anchored into wasn't a solid shelf at all. It appears they might have anchored the north side of the building into a massive, buried boulder, a guest block left behind by ancient glaciers, which is now shifting under the immense weight of the tower. Imagine trying to balance a heavy suitcase on a beach ball buried in the sand. That is effectively what is happening to a $680 million skyscraper. As the massive weight of the tower presses down, the boulder beneath is slowly rotating and sliding through the surrounding clay, carrying the foundation of the building with it. Because it is only happening on one side, the building is being pulled out of plumb. The stress this puts on the transition points between the floors and the central core is immense. You can actually hear it if you stay in the building at night when the city is quiet. There are cracks and pops that sound like distant gunshots as the steel beams twist and the bolts groan under the tension. The silence from the city's building department has been deafening. Usually, when a building shows this much movement, it is evacuated immediately. But for Richmond, the stakes are too high. If they condemn the Ascent Tower, it would be a financial catastrophe for the downtown district. The property taxes alone from this one building represent a significant portion of the local budget. So, the city and the developers are involved in a tense game of wait and see. They have installed hundreds of tilt meters and GPS sensors all over the structure, monitoring it 24 hours a day. They are hoping it will eventually hit a stable layer and stop, but so far, the sensors show that the tilt is actually accelerating. This project is a classic case of what happens when big data in engineering fails to account for local reality. The firm that designed the foundation was based out of a completely different region. They used standardized soil models that work in places like New York or Chicago, but Richmond's geology is unique. It is a transition zone where the coastal plain meets the Piedmont, creating a chaotic underground landscape of hidden springs, varying clay densities, and prehistoric anomalies. When you are building a billion-pound object, close enough isn't good enough for your geological survey. The residents are starting to organize. They've hired their own independent forensic engineers, and the reports coming back are even more grim than the official story. Some experts believe that the James River is actually playing a role. The river's water table fluctuates with the seasons, and a theory is emerging that a subterranean paleochannel, an ancient, dried-up riverbed, runs directly under the northwest corner of the site. During heavy rains, this channel fills with pressurized groundwater, lubricating the clay and making it even easier for the foundation to slide. If this is true, the building isn't just tilting. It is floating on a layer of slick mud. How do you fix a tilting skyscraper? There are only a few options, and all of them are incredibly expensive and risky. The first is a process called underpinning. This involves digging under the existing foundation and driving new, even deeper piles to bypass the sliding boulder and find the true bedrock. But doing this on a finished, occupied building is like trying to change the tires on a car while it's driving 60 miles per hour down the highway. You risk creating a sudden shift that could crack the core of the building instantly. The second option is compaction grouting. This is where they inject a specialized, thick concrete mixture into the ground at high pressure to basically glue the shifting soil and boulders together. But if you inject too much, you could actually lift the building unevenly and cause even more damage. And if the groundwater pressure from the ancient riverbed is as strong as they suspect, the grout might just wash away before it even sets. It is an engineering gamble, with hundreds of millions of dollars and human safety on the line. The situation in Richmond highlights a growing problem in the world of failing megaprojects: the lack of transparency in design-build contracts. In these arrangements, the same firm is responsible for both the design and the construction. This is supposed to save time and money, but it also removes the traditional system of checks and balances. When the architect and the contractor are the same entity, there is a massive incentive to hide mistakes rather than fix them when they are small. By the time the tilt became obvious to the public, the original construction firm had already moved on to the next project, leaving the developers and the city to deal with the fallout. While the engineers are stumped, the legal teams are working overtime. There are lawsuits flying in every direction. The owners are suing the designers for professional negligence. The designers are suing the geological surveyors for providing inaccurate data, and the surveyors are blaming the city for not maintaining the underground drainage systems. It is a circle of blame that does nothing to stop the building from leaning another 3 inches this year. What is it like to live in a tilting skyscraper? For many, the physical sensation is subtle. You might not notice it at first, but over time your body starts to react to the lack of a level horizon. People report mysterious headaches, a feeling of heavy legs, and the feeling that something is just off. There is also the psychological stress of knowing that your home is essentially a failing experiment. Every time there is a storm or a high wind event, the anxiety levels in the ascent tower spike. Will today be the day the movement goes from inches to feet? The impact on the Richmond community is also significant. The area around the tower was supposed to become a thriving new downtown. Instead, it feels like a ghost town. Potential businesses are afraid to sign long-term leases in a building that might be condemned in 5 years. The restaurants on the ground floor are struggling because foot traffic has dried up. People are fascinated by the leaning tower from a distance, but they don't want to spend time underneath it. It has become a monument to over-ambition and a warning to future developers who might think they can outsmart the earth. Engineers have started looking at mass dampers as a temporary solution. These are giant weights, often hundreds of tons of steel or lead, placed at the top of the building to counter the swaying caused by wind. But in Richmond, they are considering using a liquid mass damper with a twist. Instead of just sitting in the center, They would move the liquid to the south side of the building to act as a counterweight to the northward tilt. It is a desperate measure that has never been tried on this scale for a tilting foundation. It would be an attempt to use gravity to balance a building that is already falling over. The story of the Richmond lean is also a story about the limits of human knowledge. We like to think that we have mastered the art of building. We see the Burj Khalifa and the Shanghai Tower and we think gravity is a solved problem. But the world beneath our feet is still largely a mystery. All the satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar in the world can't always see a hidden boulder or an ancient river channel 60 feet below the surface. The Ascent Tower is a humbling reminder that on a long enough timeline, nature usually wins the fight. As the months go by, the Stumped engineers are looking into more exotic solutions. Some have proposed using electro-osmosis to dry out the clay under the building, making it harder and more stable. Others have suggested freezing the ground permanently using a network of pipes filled with coolant, a technique sometimes used in mining. These are fantasies born of desperation. The most likely reality is that the building will have to be partially dismantled to reduce its weight, or it will eventually have to be brought down entirely. The financial ripple effect of this failure is staggering. It's not just the $680 million construction cost, it's the lost tax revenue, the plummeting property values of the surrounding area, and the damage to Richmond's reputation as a growing business hub. Who will want to invest in the next big Richmond project when the most famous building in the city is a crooked ruin? The ascent has become a descent, a downward spiral of legal fees and engineering failures that shows no sign of stopping. As we look at the tower today, it serves as a powerful visual metaphor. It represents the gap between our digital dreams and our physical reality. We can render a perfect building in a computer in a few hours, but it takes years of grueling, dangerous work to build it, and it only takes a single geological fluke to ruin it. The Richmond Tower is a beautiful structure, shimmering with its glass panels and architectural curves, but its beauty is a thin veneer over a core of instability. The people of Richmond are watching and waiting. Some have suggested turning the tilt into a tourist attraction, similar to what happened in Italy. But there is a big difference between a stone tower in a piazza and a 50-story residential skyscraper in a modern American city. Safety codes won't allow a modern building to remain if it poses a threat to the public. If the movement doesn't stop, the city will eventually be forced to act. Every year that goes by is another 3 inches closer to a decision that no one wants to make. So, the next time you see a gleaming new skyscraper rising in your city, take a moment to think about what is beneath it. Think about the piles, the bedrock, and the thousands of tons of concrete that keep that giant from falling over. Think about the engineers who spend their lives worrying about the things we take for granted. And think about the Ascent Tower in Richmond, where the smartest minds in the world are currently looking at a 3-inch gap and wondering what on earth to do next. It is a $680 million mystery that is still moving, still groaning, and still mocking the people who thought they could conquer the James River soil. The story isn't over yet. Sensors are still clicking, lawyers are still arguing, and the building is still leaning. In the world of failing megaprojects, the Richmond lean stands as a unique example of a problem that is happening in slow motion, right in front of everyone's eyes. It is a disaster with a tempo of 3 inches a year, and the clock is ticking. Keep watching the skyline, because in Richmond, the view is changing every single day, whether they want it to or not. The silent, steady movement of the Earth is a force that doesn't care about budgets or blueprints. It only knows the constant pull of the planet. And for the Ascent Tower, that pull is becoming impossible to ignore. Stay tuned as we continue to follow the most expensive lean in modern history, a project that reached for the stars but forgot to check the mud.